Hi, good day to you, Nine. Welcome to lesson number 5 of week 6. Today we are moving on from humans and we're going to be looking more at plants. So we're going to be looking at the tissues and organs in plants. So before we get going, just a nice simple activity. You don't need to write any of this down. We have a picture of a plant. We've got some lines coming off it identifying the major parts of the plant. So can you pause the video and have a go at identifying the different parts of the plant that you can see. Okay, so hopefully we should have got the following. Doesn't quite line up there, but sorry about that. So at the top we have got the flower, and the flower is the reproductive part of the plant. Underneath it we have got a seed which will fall off and germinate and make a new plant. Below that we have got the leaf, which is a very important organ that you need to know about. That will be the main chunk of this lesson. Then we've got the stem which holds up the plant, and then finally at the bottom we have got the roots which take in water and minerals. Okay, so what do we need to know? We need to be able to recognize some different plant organs. If you were fine on the last activity, then that's pretty much it. You also need to be able to state what their function is. And also we need to know different plant tissues. So that's where you have the similar cells working together to perform a function. And we need to mainly know the plant tissues in a leaf. For 5 to 6, we need to be able to describe how different plant organs are involved in transporting things around the plant. For 7 to 8, we need to be able to suggest what type of plant organs unfamiliar structures are. So if you are given an example of a tissue in the exam, you would have to suggest what structures are going to be there and what it's going to be for. Now, we're not going to be doing about the light microscope at the moment, obviously because you won't have access to a microscope, but we have got in this a picture of what you would see under a microscope for a cross section of a leaf. So we're going to look at the different parts of that. Okay, so we've got a couple of examples of some extreme flowers here. We've got the elephant yam and the Titan arum. There are 2 video links that go for this. It's just a few minutes long, but it just gives you an idea of kind of the variety of different flowers that there are out there. All of them very well adapted for the type of insect it uses for pollination, or in fact some of them use birds but not these 2, and how they are adapted for that function. So if you go on to show my homework now, I've included 2 links to these videos so you can have a look at these. So if you exit this, go onto the YouTube and just get an idea of some of the crazy structures that are out there. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the videos. I kind of entered a YouTube black hole on that one. There was lots of other really good examples, so yeah, feel free to continue your YouTube exploration if you're a bit bored later on. We're going to have a look at some of the plant organs now, and this will mostly be new information for you. Okay, so just like we have different organs, the plant will also have different organs. And those organs are made of specialised tissues that allow that organ to carry out a function. So a good example, the one that we need to know is a leaf. So a leaf is an organ and it contains lots of different tissues. In the diagram, the blue kind of circle one, that is a cross-section of a stem. And you can see that there are lots of different tissues inside there, and each of those is going to have a different function. Okay, so the main kind of chunk of this lesson is going to be looking, say, at the leaf. So on the next slide, there is going to be a blank sheet. So there are some choices that you can, whichever one will work for you, and how you do this. If I go on to the worksheet and what we're going to fill in as we go through, then hopefully it makes sense. So this would be the worksheet that we would normally provide. So you can either take a screenshot of this and print it and fill it in, or take a screenshot and then fill it in on a document, a Word document or something like that. Or alternatively, you can just draw the cross section of the leaf that is in the middle. It is an important diagram because it's what they will ask you in the exam. Okay, and you can see that there are empty boxes around the outside. These are going to be the 5 main tissues that you need to know about that you can find in a leaf. So the following slides are going to be addressing each one of those. So you can annotate your diagram, or you can fill in the boxes depending on how you've done it. That will just have the main information about the function of that tissue. So we're going to start off with a layer of Palisade cells. So as you can see in the diagram, you find the Palisade mesophyll. So I'm looking at the top right one, but the Palisade mesophyll, and it's the rectangular cells that you find towards the top of the leaf. Now the Palisade mesophyll is the tissue, and it's made up of Palisade cells. And the main function of a Palisade cell is for photosynthesis. Now they're specially adapted for photosynthesis because they've got lots of chloroplasts, and they're also more of a regular shape, a rectangular shape, which means that you can get lots of them lined up towards the top of the leaf. So what I'd like you to do now is pause the video, and can you put down, label your diagram and what the function is of this tissue. And you can see that there are 2 questions at the bottom. You don't need to write answers for them, but once you've finished putting in your information, have a think about what the answers to those will be. So if you could pause the video now, please. Okay, so hopefully we've got about Palisade cells in our diagram. The 2 questions towards the bottom, hopefully you've had a think about those. So the first question is, why are Palisade cells tall and thin, vertical rather than horizontal? And that's because they can get the maximum amount of light. So if the light is passing through the leaf, it's got a lot further for it to travel, so it's more likely to be absorbed by the chloroplasts. And the second question, why do root hair cells not have chloroplasts? Well, that's because they're underground, so there's no light, so it'd be pretty pointless. Okay, so we're moving downwards now. We're going to a big chunk of the leaf, which is the spongy mesophyll layer. Okay, and the spongy mesophyll layer contains spongy mesophyll cells. Now you can see that the spongy mesophyll cells are not rectangular. They are more circular or irregularly shaped. And that's really useful because it means that they're not tightly packed together, and it creates airspace within the leaf. Now the airspace is really important because that's where all of the gases move around that the plant needs for photosynthesis. So what you're going to do when you pause the video is you're going to put information about the spongy mesophyll, what its function is and how it's adapted for that. And then you can see on the extra challenge, you do need to draw 2 arrows showing the movement of oxygen and carbon dioxide. So which way you think the oxygen goes, which way the carbon dioxide goes, And the second question, which you don't need to write down, why is there fewer chloroplasts than there are in the Palisade cells? So get the information, get those 2 arrows down, and then have a think about question number 2. So pause the video now, please. Okay, so hopefully we've got that information down. Hopefully we have got an arrow that is coming into the leaf and moving around in the airspace, and that's going to be the carbon dioxide, because that's what the plant needs for photosynthesis. And then the oxygen will be going from the Palisade cells out of the leaf through those gaps at the bottom, which we'll talk about later. Question 2, why is there fewer chloroplasts than Palisade cells? Well, that's because they're going to have less light. So because most of the light will have been absorbed in the Palisades layer, it means that the mesophyll, spongy mesophyll layer won't need as many chloroplasts. Okay, so our next section, we're looking now at the bottom, which we refer to as the lower epidermis. So you have the upper epidermis at the top and the lower epidermis at the bottom, and that's kind of just, epidermis is just kind of the outside layer. So we're going to be looking at some cells called guard cells and a part of the plant called the stomata. Now you can see in the diagrams on the right hand side that we have got these black holes. Those are the stomata. So the stomata is just the hole that allows gases to go in and out by diffusion. Now surrounding those holes are cells called guard cells. You normally have 2 guard cells, one on each side of the hole, and they will cause the stomata to open and close depending on whether gases need to go in and out or not. They will close if the plant is losing too much water, because water will actually move through the stomata as well, which is why you find most stomata at the bottom of the leaf instead of the top, because that will reduce the amount of water that the plant will lose. So can you pause the video? There are questions on this one. So can you put the information about guard cells and stomata on your diagram, and then we'll move on to the next one. So pause the video now. Okay, so the next part of the plant that we're going to look at is something called the waxy cuticle. Now the waxy cuticle is on top of the epidermal cells, the upper epidermis, and it's really important because it prevents water loss. So plants, especially in dry conditions, can't lose lots and lots of water because they need it for photosynthesis. So they will have this waxy cuticle on the top layer that prevents that from happening. Now, it says in brackets that plants that live entirely in water don't have a waxy cuticle because it's not needed. And alternatively, if you have any succulents or cacti or anything like that, they tend to have a very thick waxy cuticle to lose even less water. So we have got 3 questions that I would like you to think about. So why is the waxy cuticle found at the top of the leaf and not the bottom? 2, why do plants that live in water not need a waxy cuticle? And number 3, how do you think the waxy cuticle for a plant found in the desert would differ to that found in the UK? So you're going to get the information about the waxy cuticle in your diagram, and then you just need to think about those 3 questions. So pause the video now, please. Okay, so hopefully we've got our information about a waxy cuticle, the waxy cuticle. The questions at the bottom, we'll go through those. Hopefully you've had a think about those. So why is the waxy cuticle found at the top and not the bottom? That's because that's where the sun and the heat hit the plant. So they don't need as thick a waxy cuticle on the bottom because they're not going to lose as much water. Number 2, why do plants that live in water not need wax cuticle? It's an obvious one, because they don't need to worry about water loss. Number 3, how do you think the wax cuticle for a plant found in the desert would differ? It's going to be a lot thicker, so it loses less water if it's in the desert compared to in the UK where it's much wetter. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at something that has come up before, which is the xylem and the phloem. Now these tissues are really important because they are what transport things around the plant, and they transport water, minerals, and also food substances. And there's two main types of vessel that do this. You've got the xylem vessels, which are to do with moving water and minerals, and that goes from the roots to the leaves. The phloem vessels are involved in a process called translocation, and translocation is where food substances are moving around the plant. So they tend to go from the leaves down to the roots because they don't photosynthesize, and also storage tissues. So things like potatoes, which grow underground, that's just storing away that excess food. So what I'd like you to do is make sure you've got the information about xylem and phloem vessels, the tissue. And there is a question at the bottom that says xylem transport water and mineral ions. What mineral ions do plants need? So it's just asking, what minerals do you think a plant would need? So can you pause the video and have a go at that, please? Okay, so hopefully we've got our information about the xylem and the phloem. The answer to the question at the bottom, what mineral ions do plants need? They need lots of different ones, but some of the main ones are things like magnesium, because they need that to make chlorophyll, which in their chloroplasts, photosynthesis. You might have heard nitrates, so they need nitrates in order to make protein, and they need things like phosphorus, which they use in DNA. So lots of different mineral ions. You might have named some different ones that I haven't mentioned. Those are kind of the three big ones. Okay, so we should now have a diagram of a cross-section of a leaf and the information about those different tissues that are in the leaf that we need to know. Remember, the leaf is an organ. So we're going to finish off with a few questions. So plants contain specialised tissues that are adapted to their function. Explain how. So the first one is the epidermal tissues protect the surface of the leaf. So remember, the epidermal tissues is the top part and the bottom part. So how are they adapted for their function? You only need to put 1 point down, but there are several. The next one, Palisade mesophyll tissue adapted for photosynthesis. So how is the Palisade mesophyll tissue adapted for photosynthesis? Try not to have a look back at your notes on this, doing it from memory. And the last one is spongy mesophyll tissue adapted for photosynthesis. So how is the spongy mesophyll adapted for photosynthesis? Okay, so pause the video, and if we could have a go at those questions, please. Okay, so grab a different colour pen. Let's see how we did from our memories of what we've just done. So the first question was asking how the epidermal tissues are adapted for their function. And you could have talked about the waxy cuticle, so that is still part of the epidermal tissues, the outside layer. So you could talk about the waxy substance that reduces the amount of water loss, or you could have talked about the stomata and the guard cells in the bottom lower epidermal tissues for gas exchange, so gas is getting in and out. The Palisade cells, how they're adapted for photosynthesis, they contain lots of chloroplasts, and also they are tall. You could have said that they have a regular shape, so you can get lots of them into that layer. And the final one is how spongy mesophylls are adapted, and you could have said that they have got some chloroplasts for photosynthesis, or you could have talked about how they create the air spaces, so gas can move around, different gases can move around for photosynthesis. Okay, so that's it for today. As I say, you need to know some different plant organs. So that's what we did right at the beginning for the starter. So you've got your roots, your stem, your leaves, your flowers. 5 to 6, describe how plants are involved in the involved in the transport system. So that's the xylem and the phloem that we need to know about. So xylem transporting water and minerals, phloem transporting food in translocation. We need to also 5 and 6 be able to explain how the structures of tissues in the leaf are related to their function. So that is looking at how Palisade cells are adapted, so tall, containing lots of chloroplasts, or how the mesophyll is adapted, so that's creating those air spaces, and the epidermal tissues with their waxy cuticle. For the last one, for 7 to 8, this is if you're given unfamiliar plant organs, thinking about how they would be adapted, and also suggesting functions of unknown plant tissues. So that is if you were given, again, a different plant tissue that you had not covered, how you think it could be adapted. So that's it for week 6. Very well done for accessing these and keeping up to date on your work. Very, very important. And I will talk to you next week for week 7. Have a lovely weekend. Take care of yourselves, and you'll hear from me soon. Goodbye.